just don't be a jerk.
Uh,
Don't be the person that, and all of us, there's somebody we work with that we all avoid because, they don't care what you think. They may as well not even ask the question because they're going to do what they want to do anyway. And the easiest way to shut down creativity is to be someone who punishes people because they think differently, act differently from you. And that's a great prescription for a failed organization.
Well, I just want to first start out by saying, you have led at the highest levels in both public and the private sector. Of course, from your role as the U.S. Trade Representative to Mayor of Dallas. And in your experience, Ron, what is the single most critical quality that separates great leaders from the rest? And how do you cultivate that quality in yourself and others? So two different.
Well, I don't think there's one. And it's a great question, but I always struggle when somebody says, what's the one thing to be a great leader? What's the one thing you're most proud of? And totally separate, I don't know why I was having to prepare remarks for a good friend of mine who passed away. He was sort of a mentor and friend, and I thought of him, and I wrote these words last night that when I first got into business of government relations, and I realized, and I'll back up, notwithstanding your very kind introduction of my life in public service, I always wanted to be a lawyer. I'm a kid who grew up in the segregated South. When I was born, my parents couldn't vote. I knew who Thurgood Marshall was. And my life has been defined by walking through doors that others opened, some that they had to beckon me to come through I hadn't thought about. So I'm part of that generation that got to do things our parents and grandparents only dreamed of. But in many of those cases, I had no point of reference. I had no role model. And I realized one of the things that I've done, looking back intuitively, back to my friend, I took a yellow pad and thought of who are all of the lobbyists that I know. And who are the ones that I thought were good and why? And I listed them by name. And one, they not only knew their craft, but they were kind. They were knowledgeable. They treated staff with respect. I went through the ones I thought were good. And then the other side, I went through the ones that I thought were not. And, I don't want to oversimplify it, but they were rude. They talked over people. They wouldn't care, who Lisa Gardner was. I know Ron Kirk. I just come in. And so to simplify that question in terms of leadership, the one thing I always tell people, don't be that person that you and your friends talked about that they don't want to work for. And typically, they know it all. They're rude. They're jerks. They're whatever those things are. And be the person that you say, man, I love working for them. Why? Well, they respect my opinion. They trust me. They empower me. They give me a clear vision of what the organization wants to do and how I fit into that. And I tell people at the end of the day, don't be a jerk. Don't be that guy. Whether it's Me Too or whatever our version of inclusion, be someone who respects people, be someone who empowers people, be someone who treats people the way you would want to be treated. And those are the leaders we most respect. And now, as I've grown and learned, I also found the best leaders I've ever been around, whether it's particularly in the private sector, are excited to tell you who they just hired. And no matter how accomplished they are, I've had leaders come in and go, you got to meet this kid, Lisa Gardner. We just hired her to do. And they make you believe that everybody who works for them is smarter than themselves. Good leaders surround themselves with talent. And this is why I'm glad Matrice is here with me. As I like to say, they empower and give people the freedom. But I tell people the easy way to understand it, the best leaders, be a little bit lazy. The easiest way to learn how to delegate is empower. Quit trying to do everything yourself so that you can focus on what's important, but that intuitively embodies the idea that you've got to trust and respect the people that you work with and give them a chance to soar and understand that we're all different. So they're not going to do it the way you did it. And the purpose of bringing in talent, you know what you know. You know how you want to approach a problem. The best leaders surround themselves with people who help them think differently, see a problem differently, hopefully come up with different solutions they might have otherwise overlooked. So that's a long answer, but
it's a great answer.
Short answer is just don't be a jerk. Don't be the person that and all of us, there's somebody we work with that we all avoid because, they don't care what you think. They may as well not even ask the question because they're going to do what they want to do anyway. And the easiest way to shut down creativity is to be someone who punishes people because they think differently, act differently from you. And that's a great prescription for a failed organization.
That's good. That's good. Two things come to mind. I had one guest was Ron Parker, which I believe you do know, Mr. Parker. But Ron said, the definition of a functional, effective, diverse group is innovation, creativity. He said something of that nature, right? The definition of it. And
Ron's a wonderful manifestation of that.
Yes, he is. I always say, he was my mentor coming into corporate America many, many, many years ago. And, I think when I think of him and I think of a few others, they were just the pioneer of DE&I back when it wasn't really even ever talked about, especially in, Fortune 100 companies. And of course, what he did with PepsiCo and Frito-Lay and that kind of thing. But, so just two things from what you said, the innovation and the creativity, the best solutions come from a diverse group around the table. That's how you get your best answers, your best solutions, your best innovative products, right? Whatever it may be. But secondly, you talked about, surrounding yourself with very talented people, no matter what their age is. The leader is excited that they brought in, this young man, this young woman from outside, and that they have a lot of potential. Tell me just experiences about you watching some of the folks that maybe you have brought in, some of those you have mentored or sponsored, and you've seen them rise to greater levels than maybe that they ever thought, that you ever thought. We had one discussion I had with Herman Bowles was the pet to threat syndrome. And I find that great leaders don't have that syndrome. They bring them in. Pet to threat means you bring them in, you're mentoring, you're sponsoring, but then they become a threat because you realize that they're so talented, they may surpass you.
I think it's important that at least for anybody watching this know, Lisa and I really didn't go over all these questions, but she's mentioning all my friends. And that's one of my things. Yeah. I get people, I'm at a stage in my life, people say, I want you to mentor me. And one thing I tell young people, most of the people that have influenced my life were classmates, were friends. And we can, and believe me, I was that kid that worshiped Vernon Jordan, looked up to Colin Powell.
Yeah.
I was joking with someone the other day with, in my mind, almost a singular exception of running for mayor. I've never applied for a job in my life. Every job I got was because of a relationship with someone I'd worked with, knew me, and said, hey, have you thought about this? And so one of the things I've tried to do, and Mark, and you mentioned Herman Bowles, and I'm smiling because he and my wife are at a conference together as we speak.
Are they really?
At the National Association of Corporate Directors. And breaking news, Herman Bowles was selected as the most outstanding corporate director for the year. So
it doesn't surprise me. He is
great friend, great mentor. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, just Google him on LinkedIn. He's most proud of the fact he's a West Point grad. I think all four of his sons went to West Point. 3 of them played football, and one of his sons and grandson lives here.
Well, he's been a guest on the podcast, and he's been Lawrence's mentor for 20 plus years. Yes. Yes,
one of the things I'm most proud of. Now, my staff at City Hall was pretty small.
Yes.
My staff at Secretary of State. Well, I am still friends with everybody who ever worked for me.
I just love that, Ron.
And I love, 2 days ago, I just filmed a tribute for Justin London, who is now the chancellor of Dallas College, which used to be the Dallas Community College System.
Yeah.
And kids. And Justin, it gave me joy to hear Justin talk about the fact that he met me as an intern when he came to me when I was mayor. And after a year of interning with this, I asked him to stay on and be my communications director. And he's like, look, my background's in this and that. And I said, yeah, but you understand me. And he progressed from that and then left. And my former chief of staff, Christy Sherrill, is now head of government and corporate relations for Baylor Healthcare System. And I just went and saw her baby sing her debut at the state fair, state fair of Texas. Nefertarius McPherson, bless her heart, who sadly passed away from kidney disease. Same thing, came to me as an intern, helped her get a job, in a law firm. She went with me to USTR, traveled the world. Isaac Foz was a young Hispanic kid who volunteered on my campaign for the Senate, came from a family of migrants, the first in his family to go to college, go to the University of Texas. We helped him get into law school. He followed me to Washington, got to work with me on government affairs. Now he's a corporate executive, Starbucks, and on and on.
And on and on.
And I tell people your ultimate legacy is the success of those who followed you. And you don't often get to do that in politics because I can't control who follows me as mayor.
That's true.
And I mean, the ultimate example, who would have believed we would have, in a 8-year period of time, a 12-year span, gone from the nation's pride and excitement over electing Barack Obama to then electing Donald Trump. But what you can control is who you hire. And again, leadership to me is about who you've empowered to succeed. And one of my role models was a lawyer by the name of Broadus Spivey, who was the first lawyer I clerked for when I went to law school. There were not that many firms looking to hire black folks. It was a small personal injury firm. These guys were all from West Texas. You couldn't have come from more different worlds. But the smartest thing they did, they allowed all of their law clerks to hire their replacements. Because their mindset was, Lisa, you know better what it's like to work at PepsiCo than we do. And one of my classmates, again, was a guy named Pat Kelly, who had graduated and said, what are you doing? I don't have a job. And I went to work for them. And as much as I learned from them, what I most took was how I became a part of their family.
Yes.
Spent weekends with he and his family at the ranch. He empowered me to do things. And Mark Morial and I talked about this when I interviewed him for something similar to this a few years ago, about how one of the criticisms of me has been my pushing for those of my generation, in the words of one of my heroes, to say, nobody's asking you to move out, but how about if you move over? But he reminded me, when I was a young lawyer working for U.S. Senator Lloyd Bentsen, at least I was 26 years old, and advising the president, the United States Senate on national security. I moved back to Dallas. I ran government affairs when Ann Richards tabbed me to be head of the General Services Commission, purchasing for the entire state of Texas. I was 38 years old. When she tabbed me to be Secretary of State, I was 39 years old. When I was arrogant enough to put myself up for mayor, I was 40 years old.
That's right.
And in every one of those cases, I remember how privileged I felt that Lloyd Bentsen and Richards had enough confidence in me to and it made me work that much harder.
Yeah.
And I tried to remind myself that all these, quote, kids working for me were looking to me to have the same confidence and faith in them.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times you just have to be willing to give someone that opportunity to succeed, and you'll be surprised how far they'll go.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to learn that you just can't be overly critical when they fail, because again, you always stay true to your fundamental mission.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever you're in, whether it's a nonprofit or a business, we keep talking about, Frito-Lay or Jones Lane, you're there to win.
Mm-hmm.
And to do that, you've got to have a team around you that helps you succeed or come up with new ideas. And again, I've seen it over and over again. You don't want any fresh ideas. You don't want any innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Always criticize your staff when they make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Always be the person, to hold somebody up as a bad example. And that creates an environment that the Lisa Gardners and the Ron Kirks in the room just sit in the back. And when I raise my hand, Lisa goes, just It ain't welcomed. Don't make yourself a target. So we will sit there and let you walk to the park and step in a pile of dog. You know what? Because you're the smartest man in the world. Whereas if you got a team that loves you, somebody's going to grab your hand and say, hey, boss, you might want to look down and walk another way.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, going back to your ages of such great responsibility, what qualities do you think Ann Richards saw in you? And you mentioned another gentleman's name.
U.S. Senator Lloyd.
Yes.
And, you know, I know we've only got 45, whatever.
Yeah. Yes.
I can't go through all the ways. Ann Richards moved to Austin from Waco when I was a kid doing Jim Crow.
Yes.
And Ann was one of those early advocates for fighting Jim Crow, particularly restricted voting rights, and somehow, you know, got integrated with the Austin progressive community. So long story short, see somebody at least I've known about since I was 8 or 9 years old. She got me my first internship when I was in college at Austin College doing the Constitutional Convention. And so what Ann saw in me was just potential. And, you know, I will try to shorten it, but if, for those of you who don't know Ann Richards, she was elected governor of Texas 1990, ushered in what she called a new Texas. And she deliberately filled her cabinet full of young women and blacks and Latinos. And she reminded us every day, look, we don't know how long we're going to be here, but let's assume I've got one term. And we're not here to lead this state looking the way we did. And if you aren't courageous enough to make decisions, to make changes, then you need to tell me now, and let's get somebody in. And so she always harped on two things, that if all we do is change the complexion, the gender of those who sit around the table, but we don't understand that core mission, that we've got to make life better for all Texans, make courageous decisions, then DE&I is sort of a toothless tiger. But her deal was, more than anything, Ann impressed upon me the urgency to be bold and make decisions now. Don't take for granted that you can do it next year. Do now what you can do then. But more than anything, Ann was one of those people when I talked about me walking through some doors that had been open and me having somebody open a door and pull me in. Thank God. She always saw more potential in me sometimes than I saw in
yourself.
And, you know, my wife, I've referenced Latrice Ellis Kirk, is in the executive search business for years. And one of the things we talk about, particularly when we get to the C-suite or places of power, in many cases, women and people of color that, you know, are first generation, we've studied harder, we've gone to business school, we've gone to law school. And yet when we get there, we can too often be the voice in our head that said, do I belong? You know, even though we've worked hard to get in the room, then we get in the room and wonder, wow, should I be here? And Ann was one of those, hell no, you belong. And one of my favorite anecdotes, and it's hard to believe this was 30 years ago, when somebody asked her a question similar to what, I'll digress a minute. Somebody asked the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, after President Obama had appointed Justice Sotomayor, and then, God, she's going to get Elena Kagan to the court. You know, Justice Ginsburg spoke somewhere, and somebody said, well, my God, we've got 3 women on the Supreme Court now. I mean, how many more? You know, how many, when will there be enough? And Justice Ginsburg, in her quiet, stern way, looked at him and says, when there are 9. And, you know, nobody ever asked, are there too many white men on the board? Nobody ever asked and questioned that, but we will question ourselves. But someone asked Ann once, she was governor, and, you know, this, have we achieved equality? And she says, honey, let me tell you what equality is. Equality is not me hiring Lisa Gardner out of UT and Harvard with the best credentials in the world. Equality will be when Lisa Gardner becomes the CEO and drives a company into the ground the way many of these CEOs does, and either keeps her job or when she leaves with this incredible package that rewards her for her failure. And her women and people of color have to have not just the ability to come in and be the rock star, but have the ability to be okay, like everybody else. Now, I'm not advocating mediocrity. But what I do want to say to those of you watching is stop doubting yourself. You've worked your tail off. You've gone to a great school. You've got that job. And just know this. I tell people, at least for people of color and women, when you walk in a room, everybody knows who you are. You don't have to open your mouth. So don't hold your voice. They want you there.
Yes.
For your opinion. Remember, it's all about bringing new voices, new perspectives to the organization so that they can make better decisions. And your silence, your reticence about speaking up might deprive your CEO, your company, of that one voice that says, we've never thought of this that way. Why don't we take a different look?
So good. So good. Well, I'm going to change gears for a minute. Given your experience, Ron, navigating the complexities of U.S. politics and international relations, what do you see as the greatest leadership challenge facing today's policymakers? And what advice would you give them to turn obstacles into opportunities?
Always, for me, anytime anyone comes to me and says, wow, I want to follow your page, I want to run. I always started, for me, everything starts with, what's your why? Why do you want to be mayor? Why do you want to be in Congress? Do you want to be mayor because you see the mayor on TV? Do you want to, this so you can hang out? Or do you want to be in office because you believe you have something to offer in us collectively creating the America we want it to be? I still believe that the overwhelming majority of people who go into public service go into it for the right reason.
And what are those reasons? What are those reasons?
Well, for me, it was when I ran for mayor, for example, it was hard to believe, but as my friend Dale Williams so poetically says, Dallas was a city that had perfected the art of saying no. And we were more concerned about our differences than our commonalities. And so I just looked at a city and thought there's no reason for a city this prosperous in the middle of the country with a great airport, great resources, to be our own worst enemy. And I thought we could do better. And I frankly thought my background in government and law uniquely positioned me to kind of help the council get focused on solving problems rather than spending time on, fighting one another. And we have to get back to that. But in order to do it, we need the public's help. And, obviously, we are probably in as divided of an America right now in terms of ideology as we've been. People wonder, can we fight through the noise? And the one thing I always start with, I tell people, you get the government you voted for. If you want civility, stop electing jerks. Stop electing people who singularly run on a dark dystopian view of our country and sees the other party or person as an enemy, versus people that will at least sit down from that commonality of why, wanting to perfect our country, make it open for everyone, and stay focused on that mission. Because if we do that, we can find common ground. And I spent a lot of time talking to people about this, and they wonder, are America's best days behind us or ahead of us? And I tell them the one thing I learned from my time as USTR, still when you go to most places around the world, particularly developing economies, countries that are seeking to find their way forward, if those parents have a choice to send their children anywhere in the world to get one thing that they believe can change the path of their life, it's to get an education, they aren't sending their kids to Russia or to China. They're still sending them to the University of Texas. One of our greatest tools and assets has been that you didn't just sit down with kids from Dallas or from Oklahoma. If you're privileged to go to UT or you picked the college, you were enriched because there were kids who were there from the Bahamas or from Europe, from Asia or from Africa. We're one of the few countries that has the capacity to accept not only our kids, but other kids from around the world. That's a strength for ours. And that is a good thing. But our biggest hurdle right now is the internecine war that we have of trying to define ourselves by the least common denominator. And there's others who have written more about it. But any country that decides what tribe you're in, what God you worship, what race you are, whom you love, any country that is more homogenous in their politics and their religion tends to be less successful in those countries that have said, you know what, we think we'll do better if we just take the best of who's ever here. And the story of America, as imperfect as it is, has been we were welcoming to people from all over the world who, for whatever reason, felt that they couldn't achieve their dreams in their own country. Now, you and I know, with my experience having grown up during Jim Crow, it isn't perfect, but what makes America special is, as Jim Clyburn, who's a great friend, reminds us, the Tocqueville said, what makes America unique was its willingness to repair our faults. And if we are willing to do that, then we keep moving toward those high ambitions set out in the Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. But that's a little bit in question right now. Mm-hmm. And so my short answer is we just have to commit ourselves to being the America that we all said we wanted to be a part of, where everybody gets to play. No matter how perfect it is, stop worrying about who's different and worried about what can they bring to the table to make us a more welcome, a more prosperous, a more successful city, state, country. If we do that, then I think we have the ability to craft a future for our kids that'll be as bright as the one that you and I inherited from our parents.
Well, let me just ask you a follow-up question to that, because that was communicated beautifully. I don't think you communicated any better. It's just how to face the challenges. But what tangible actions, Ron, do you believe leaders in the legal and political arenas can go to take beyond the words and create lasting, meaningful change when it comes to some of these topics, around inclusion, respecting others, understanding that we did build a country where families felt comfortable from all over the world to bring their children to come to school? I thought that was a great example. How do we go beyond and do some tangible actions for those who don't want to understand or who choose not to understand, who are trying to push us backward?
Don't be cowed by the challenge. And history is important because you learn from it, good or bad.
Right.
That's one thing we know. We became the most dominant economy in the world because of a couple of things. One, and again, I know it seems like our investment in public education, our decision that we needed people with at least a high school education to be able to work in factories and automate it. But our decision to educate everybody is singularly viewed as one of the greatest investments we've made. It still is. And investing in our public education, our teachers, empowering them is still one of the fastest tools we can go forward. Secondly, we know, as I said again, as imperfect as it is, empowering women, giving them the right to vote, giving them the right to be in corporate America, bringing more people, companies that don't put a collar around what their talent looks like, we know outperforms companies that do. And we know countries that do, because we welcomed in millions of Jews after the Holocaust. We welcomed in Italians and Irish people. And even though we were brought here in chains, once we took those chains off and began to realize, they may have been on the farm, but they weren't slaves. They were engineers. They were scientists. They were teachers and lawyers and doctors. We know that, and that when we wipe away these foolish notions that we can somehow look at you and know what your dreams and ambitions are without asking you and empowering you, is a prescription for failure. And so we have to get back to doing those things. And then third, when I traveled as USTR, particularly in the developing world, over and over again, one, it was interesting how the first 18 months, even though I had a job to do, every one of my initial meetings was consumed by my colleague looking at me and lecturing me about what a huge deal it was that America had elected as its president someone not from the dominant race, political class, raised without a father, mixed heritage, to the highest office in the land, and what that said about inclusion. And then I had colleagues literally in 28 asking me, is it true that if you come to America, there are buses that'll pick up your kids and take them to school? And third, that everybody gets to vote. And the reason I'm going back to those three things, when our problems can seem so big that it feels like we're trying to boil the ocean, I just think of the wisdom of my father, who would always look at us and say, look, nobody's asking you to move the mountain, but you could get your shovel, you know, you could move a couple of pieces of dirt. And so what I would say to you, look, the most powerful tool you have to change our politics still is to vote. And it is a sad commentary for what is broadly recognized as one of the oldest democracies in the world. We have one of the lowest voting participations. Then you look at other countries around the world, when they get the right to vote, it is a 90, 80, percent turnout.
5%.
We'll be lucky if we get 50% of the people vote in the elections in Texas. Mm-hmm. And I use just a crude corporate analogy then. You want a great return on your investment? Be one of the 30% of the people who regularly votes, because you are inheriting the power of those 70% who don't. So don't think that, oh my God, this seems so big, I can't do that. Educate yourself, take the time to vote. Mm-hmm. Make sure you are the leader that creates the environment that you tell your children. Michelle Obama, I heard her speak here when Latrice interviewed her a few years ago, and she had a beautiful way of expressing it. She challenged men of daughters to say, have you created a company that mirrors the world that you tell your daughters every night? Because you tell your girls they can grow up and be anything
they want to be.
And yet, in your company, if they were to come to work for you, would they see that reflected in what you have said? Mm-hmm. And so the challenge for us is to take actions that are commensurate with our aspirations. Mm-hmm. And we didn't get to where we are overnight. And we're not going to wake up and and I'll say it, I'll go there if we defeat, the Dark Lord, Donald Trump, which I think we will. All of our problems didn't start with Donald Trump. But the one thing I know about leadership is tone at the top matters. And when you have your spouse to kind of rhetoric, you conduct yourself the way that Donald Trump did, and he continues to, that gives license to a lot of people to say it's okay. So this isn't going to go away whether Trump wins or loses, but we can make a statement that, as I like to say, at least the angels are a little better organized than the mafia. And we just keep taking those steps to perfect this union. I would like to remind people of the words of Dr. King that are inscribed in our on the wall of our National Museum of African American History. Mm-hmm. But it reminds us that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. So these things don't happen overnight. Mm-hmm. But I also like to remind people the fact that it says it bends toward justice, inherent in that is that it doesn't bend itself. We have to keep fighting. We have to keep advocating for equality, for opportunity, just so that we don't let go of the arc and it snap back in a direction that we know would not be in our benefit. So, I mean, that's a long answer.
No
easy things, but make sure you vote. Make sure you're the kind of leader, the kind of neighbor, mm-hmm. the kind of person of faith who practices what we preach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, going back to your first answer, when we talked about leadership, short answer, you said just don't be a jerk. I mean, I think it starts at a grassroots level too, as far as how we can make impact. Whatever organization that we are leading, that we are, whether it's local, national, again, just make sure that you are valuing all people. They don't feel invincible, that they're being heard in the room. That, I love the analogy when you said that when fathers put their daughters asleep at night, are they truly representing what they're telling their daughters at night? That
we tell our kids they can be anything.
And we've told them that since the time that they were born. And so are we representing that when we go out into the workplace? So again, it becomes, that's one reason why I've named the podcast the Uncompromised Podcast, is because how is it that we're living a life the best way we can, not perfectly, uncompromised in the way that we lead, the way that we are, professionally handling ourselves as well as personally. And I think that just sort of dials back into this. And that's why these discussions are important, because I believe it just starts with a small podcast of communication, right?
Through life, we learn lessons. I mean, I was talking to someone about both and I loved being mayor. Uh-huh. But when you're in public service, particularly now with a world with social media and open commentary. Trust me, you're in a world that you get reminded every day how god-awful a mayor you are. You're terrible. And it can be easy to throw your little pity party. And, people say the most offensive things to us. And we had one occasion I'll never forget when I was mayor. I mean, somebody was incredibly offensive, both in terms of saying things that were inoffensive to women, people. I mean, it wasn't across the board. And I blasted him. I just blasted him. And I will never forget our council meetings. It was a big thing, were televised. And we tend to think nobody's watching this. Well, a lot of people were watching. And I got a letter from a mother who told me that she was raising 2 kids and that her 5-year-old's greatest joy was to sit with her and watch the Dallas City Council meetings and watch our first Black mayor. And what an inspiration I had been to her son, but that her son had seen me use language that she had told him I should never use. Because I didn't drop an F-bomb, but as you know, I was nicknamed Mayor Potty Mouth or the news for a reason. And so I got that letter, and it just sobered me. And I had a wonderful friend and partner in my communications person who ran my campaigns, Carol Weed, who always preached to me, lesson number 1, when you screw up, say you're sorry. Don't try to say, and Lisa, I could, if I could go back, if I read you the letter I responded to, I promise you 90% of it, you should have done that. But I listened to her, and I went back and I read her later. I took a moment of personal privilege, and I read her letter in full verbatim.
Wow.
For the public, and I apologized to her son. But it also forced me to go back, and I realized something my mother used to preach to me, that no matter how legitimate it may feel, that the next day I have never felt better about making somebody feel smaller than if I had extended them grace. And it was a lesson that I learned, particularly when I was angry and mad, is that 2 things, and this is a good lesson for all leaders, especially now with social media. If you can buy yourself one night's sleep, I'd say this for our marriage, our kids, anything.
Yes.
Particularly when you're angry and disappointed, if you can just buy yourself a night's sleep, everything looks different in the morning, including what you would say, as opposed to saying, you all screwed up, I'm disappointed, you've done this. Then the next day you can come in and go, hey, team, we didn't get where we wanted to go. Because again, we started with talking about how special we feel when we're young and we're empowered. Nobody knows we've screwed up faster than we did. And the difference in your boss coming in and saying, instead of you screwed up, saying, team, well, we missed the mark on that one. Now, what are we going to do? What did we learn? What are we going to do? How do we get better? Then that gives you a chance to let people say, wow, I did. But then they will work that much harder to try to help you get it right the next time. But anyway, I know I have long answers for all of these, but if you can, I just find if you can find a way to operate from a position of grace, that you just will never regret that. And that goes back to the coarseness of our political environment right now. It's real easy to look at people and say, how could you vote for him and that and do it? But just realize we all come at life from the prism that world in which we grew up in.
That's right.
Everybody doesn't have 2 daughters who live in New York and dance or in arts and see the world very differently. And a kid who grows up in Western Pennsylvania. And we need a little more grace. We need a little more kindness.
Yes, we do.
And I promise you, as a parent, as a husband, as a mom, as a leader, you will never regret extending grace versus, as much as we want to, just going ahead and destroying somebody.
That's really great. That's really great. I think just going back to, we're all in different kinds of circles, whether it's work related. And you're absolutely right. I've had to have that thinking of extending grace, or I could go around really upset at a lot of people. But I have to realize where they're coming from isn't where I'm coming from, and how they're believing or how they're voting or whatever they're doing. They're not coming from the same direction as I am. So that's a good way of putting it. It's extending grace. It's extending.
But I would also say this as a leader, and I know I say a lot, but go back to never lose sight of the fact we're here to win.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're in business, you're in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Look, you're here to win. If you're
yes.
you know, my pastor, I'll never forget when we went through a period, we were trying to build a new sanctuary and we didn't have room, so everybody had to worship at once. We had a few families that were unnerved by the fact that, you know, as we say in the black church, you didn't dismiss the babies when the sermon started.
Right.
Some people complain we got to do something. And Pastor Holmes just said, you know, some people think of crying babies as a sign of a growing church. But, you know, in business, whatever you do, look, you're here to grow. And I believe in extending grace, but also believe you can use the way you respond and reward people to send that message. Yeah, Lisa gets to do more because Lisa's kicking butt. Lisa works.
That's a flip side. There is a flip side. Yes,
you don't have to do, but
right.
And how you accommodate, cover, particularly in a small organization, everybody knows who's not pulling their weight.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, I don't care if it's your cousin, you know, your nephew or somebody you went to see, you allowing somebody to constantly, not necessarily fail, but work against the interest of the organization sends a horrible message to everybody who's there trying to pull with you.
Mm-hmm.
And as much as I'd like to think all people have heard this and said, wow, I'd love to work for him, that I've also learned how to fire people. And it's hurtful. And I had a wonderful leader in Anna Leslie Muncie, who was city attorney, that hired me. And she told me, you'll never learn how to lead till you don't let people go.
That's right.
And you know.
Yes. And, you know, just to just piggyback on that, a high EQ isn't just about being likable and getting along with people, but a high EQ is understanding how to handle conflict and be a change maker and making those hard decisions. But go ahead. Yes.
No, but look, in reality, in every organization, there's sort of a what I call maybe 30, 30 or 50, 30, 10% rule. 50% of the people there, because I need this job. I got kids. I do, I got benefits. And I'm going to be here and I'm going to do my job. I'm great.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully when you come in, there are going to be 20% of the people that are like, oh my God, we got Lisa Gardner. I'm so excited. Ron Kirk's here. I'm going. And they are going to be all in. Mm-hmm. And I don't care if it's a church, a police department, a city, a plant. There are 10, you're lucky. There are 10% of the people that no matter what you do, they are so bad and doing stuff that you just go, did you read the memo? I mean, I remember as mayor, after we'd settled, it seemed like, our sexual harassment suit of every 6 months. And we had, cities were the first. We had training. All of our directors had to go through. And at one point, one of our council members said, do these people understand this is not an instruction manual? This is supposed to be what not to do. But for those people that just don't get it, you got to let them go. There's a saying I saw on a T-shirt that Kelvin Walker reminded us, some people may find crude, but it says simply, stop arguing with people that Harriet would have left behind.
It makes all the sense in the world to me.
And, we think of Harriet Tubman's as great, heroic Native people.
That's right.
Harriet was like,
that's right.
Buddy, we're going. Are you coming or not?
Are you coming or not? I don't have time. That's
so
right.
We want grace. We want all of that, but never lose sight. Always keep top of mind. What's our goal? Mm-hmm. What's our role here?
Mm-hmm.
What are we going to be rewarded on for our success and how we move that needle?
Mm-hmm.
And make sure you surround yourself with people that understand the mission and want to work toward that goal. Because you get those 15%, the rest, the large bulk of us are followers. But that 10%, you can't. I've just seen too many people obsess over the 10% who won't and forget about the 90% who will.
Who will.
And I love analogies, but everything. I mean, I tell people, I find this fascinating, whether it's a funeral or a wedding, people spend the most money they've ever spent in their lives on those two things, their wedding and a funeral. And I have not been to one, and maybe it's just us of us. It could be a big wedding, successful, and you get home, you put your feet up and you're doing, and somebody go, you know what? I didn't see Aunt Bessie. And I'm going, there were 600 people here. Why are we talking about who didn't show up?
What about those who did?
Like God, you had 700 people who showed up and danced. The first thing you're going, I didn't see so-and-so. I didn't do this. We not our pastor now, but we had a former pastor who obsessed more people who would complain about him no matter what. Every sermon they came, you did wrong. I said, did you not notice that at the end that the other 90% of us were standing up and clapping and shouting? It's like, how about you feed that flock and ignore those other ones?
Because that's just noise. Absolutely.
That's noise.
Noise. Absolutely. So let me ask you this. Here's my other question. So transitioning from public service to a senior role in the private sector, to me, that's huge. All right. So what strategies have helped you bridge the gap between the two worlds? And how can professionals leverage their public service experience to lead more effectively in corporate settings?
Well, I always thought one of my strengths, particularly when I ran for mayor, was that I had been in the private sector. And even though
that's true,
and I'm proud.
Yes,
people
that's right.
always, they look at my resume and go, "Oh, bull." But I told you, I was motivated by the efforts of my parents and Dr. King and others. But when I was born, my parents could not vote. Lisa, I know your husband and I grew up in Austin. I'm a little older. I attended.
Yes.
We're the test tube babies of the civil rights movement. So I knew who Thurgood Marshall was.
Wow.
And however young we were when, whether it was middle school, when they said, "Ron, what do you want to be?" I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be this great civil rights crusader. Now, whether people think of lawyers or business people or not, but that was always top of mind for me. But maybe growing up in Austin, a capital city, watching my parents fight for the right to vote, for not just me, but our generation, the idea of not voting, of not being civically engaged, just wasn't in our DNA. So I've always straddled both worlds, but I've always believed I was a much better mayor because of all the time I spent in private service, in the private sector, particularly helping companies navigate public laws and processes. And I brought with me the knowledge that, look, what we do affects the way 1 million people live and work. That shouldn't be easy. And it shouldn't be just because you wake up with a crazy idea, let's go pass this law. Think about how that impacts. And then when I became more involved in corporate America, frankly, what I thought was a weakness. I was guilty of everything I preached today. The first board I got on a year after I was mayor. I worried everybody else in here is running a public company. Granted, I'm, sort of chairman of the board, non-executive chairman of a public company. But I realized over the years, my experience in governance, in transparency, in processes was as valuable as theirs. And I could bring with me the perspective of why it's important to have good practices. And now, when you look at ESG and post-Enron and others, all those experiences can be valuable to you. And what I have learned is no matter what environment you're in, going back to my yellow sheet of paper of what's good and bad, you take away from this, wow, what are the most effective ways to lead? What are the least effective? What makes a good board member? What doesn't make a good board member?
Makes sense.
And so all of us are a product of all of our life experiences, and that's valuable. Bring that with you.
Absolutely.
And utilize that. And then finally, I would say for a lot of us, and I don't know who your audience is, but I don't know that everyone values board service on not-for-profits as much as a lot of people think, well, I only want to be on a board if I'm be on a corporate 500 board. Well, when you're serving on a lot of these not-for-profits, you're serving with the CFO. Half of those boards are made up of people who have money, people who are philanthropists, but many of them have people who come from the corporate world. And what I have found, particularly now, 25 years being a board member, every time we have an opening, the first question we ask before we go out on the search is, all of you serve on other boards, Sweetie? What do you know? What do you think? Who do you know? And more often than not, particularly now, people will say, wow, there's this fantastic young woman that I've worked with on the Symphony board, the Food Bank board, and she's mid-level now at X company. But boy, if we could grab her before, everybody becomes aware.
Right. Where
I think all of those experiences can be important to you. But the most important lesson I had, if you accept the responsibility to go on a board again, go back to your why. It's about the work. You don't get to coast. You've got to do the work, and particularly on a not-for-profit. Because particularly for women, people of color, a lot of times as we're moving up in a city like Dallas, there'll be people go, "Oh, Lisa, we know you. We know you've got a podcast and a job and kids, but we've got to have somebody. We just need your name. You won't have to come." The worst thing you can do is
exactly. Absolutely. Yes.
Because I promise,
not agree more.
When you do get the offer for that job, the first thing they're going to do is say, "Okay, where have they been involved?" And they're going to call the zoo board, the Hockaday board, the symphony board, and say, "Hey, I saw you served with Ron Kirk. Tell me about it."
Right. How do you contribute?
I have no idea. Never showed up. Never saw him. So if you're going to do it, do something that you really care about, and you're going to lend your passion and your energy and your expertise. And then don't try to, if you do it because you think I'm here, because if I do this, Lisa Gardner, Ron Kirk said, then I'll get that. They'll see you coming. Do it because you care about it. Do it because you have a passion and energy for that. And I promise you, it'll pay off for you in ways that you never anticipated.
Great advice. Very good direction. I could not agree with you more. I'm going to end with this last question because I always like to end with it. What leaders have inspired you, or leader?
Well, you heard me saying to prove I can be big. You heard me mention over and over again. And one,
Ann Richards,
yeah. I mean, Ann Richards was personal. Brought us Spivey was now obviously, and I'll be like, my parents made a huge difference in empowering me.
Yes.
But I will also tell you, I have admired as much friends and colleagues I've worked with.
Yes.
50 years, 40 years now. Rodney Ellis, Royce West have been two of my closest friends. We all came up together. We watched each other climb and succeed and go. The departed Congresswoman Mickey Leland.
Okay.
Brought together a bunch of us when we were in our 30s and asked each of us to bring two other people, all younger than 40. And we started this thing called Tax Blackets. And his whole idea was, you guys have got to be the generation that takes advantage of these opportunities. And he stepped back. He said, because you don't need my political baggage. But Lisa, out of that group came Sam Lindsay, the first Black federal district judge, Demetrius Sampson, the first Black of the law firm. And that's someone who's the first Black judge, Rodney Ellis, Royce West, so many, the first Black partner, Milton Scott, who's passed away, at Arthur Anderson. And so what I'm seeing is, so often we think it's got to be somebody out there, but it can be your sisters. Listen, there's a more powerful leadership group right now than the Divine Nine that's about to change the fortune of this country. And those are all people who grew up with, know, and loved both Kamala Harris and Howard and Morehouse and Spellman.
Yes.
So for each of us, it's going to be different, but unquestionably, Ann Richards and Lloyd Benson, those leaders I've worked for. And for Ann, for me, because it wasn't just about government, I was so privileged. I can't tell you that when the governor passed away from cancer, the family asked me to be the presiding officer over the service. And one of the things I talked about, and I'm glad I didn't, when the governor was going through her battle with cancer and she was at MD Anderson, for just reasons that evolved, we had a weekly call every Monday afternoon. That was somewhere between a Dave Chappelle comedy skit and a spiritual Bible study and that. But every conversation I had with Governor Richards started with the same question. How's your family? How are those girls? Do you tell them you love them every day? And never forget that women get their self-esteem from their fathers. And so as I look back and I thought of all the ways she impacted my life, it wasn't enough. And you'll hear this, from young athletes, if they talk about their favorite teacher or coach, it's like, yeah, he taught me football, but he taught me so much more about life, about being a man, about being a husband, being a father, being a responsible adult. So for me, it's, those, you've heard me talk about the people that impacted me. And there are people that still, now my daughters are some of my heroes. I mean, they're 32 and 35, but they challenge me intellectually, culturally, and stretch me into ways I look at life in which I didn't know I needed, but I find both confounding, but also refreshing and spiritually reviving.
Mm. We have one of those in our house. She's 22, though.
Well, I've got two of them, and it ain't going to change.
Well, let me tell you, Mr. Gardner, he is challenged the same way. She is the best thing for him. I just can't tell you how much she has challenged his thinking, how he looks at things, has made him look in the mirror in ways he's never looked in the mirror. Daughters and fathers are very special, extremely special.
We used to have this funny saying in my family that we will go through whatever it is and we do, and I'll have my speech. And of course, the older we do become our parents. I'm like, wait, I pay the bills. Yes. I'm doing stuff. But we affectionately call it Kirk Party of One. It's me versus them.
It is.
But we laugh, but you know what? You want to grow. And we'll say this.
Yes.
As a parent, you want to grow strong, independent kids. And we talk about leaders. I served on a board, PetSmart, with a guy by the name of Larry Del Santo. Mm-hmm. And when you met him and everybody, same thing. Larry Del Santo had 11 kids. Mm-hmm. And everyone would look at him like, holy crap. And he'd say, look, I can tell you two things. You want to give them strong wings and weak roots.
Strong wings and weak roots.
And that's our challenge as parents.
Yes.
That's our challenge as parents. And again, you and I, you mentioned, and I'm sure maybe people go, how do they all know one another? Well, generationally, Ron Parker, Herman Bulls, Shelley, they're doing those things, our parents. But I tell them, why would we think our children's dreams should be limited to our universe? Each of us is doing things our parents never dreamed. So you would hope that our kids are going to take it to the next level.
Oh, that's all that we hope for. And that's what we tell them. We want you to go greater, further, deeper than what we did.
And we'll end with that. And then when you're leading, make sure you have created the environment that mirrors the world you told your children that they can inherit.
That's right. That's right. More than true. More than true. Well, I just want to thank you. You actually did a full hour and 1 minute with me. I got a full hour with the Ron Kirk.
I can't find the breaks. I'm sorry.
I know. I'm so happy that you did not.